The battlefield's last breath. The sky burned crimson over the shattered ruins of Earth's last stronghold. Smoke and ash choked the air as Captain Darius Kane staggered through the chaos. His armor, once a shining symbol of humanity's resilience, was now scorched and riddled with holes. Blood dripped steadily from a gash on his forehead, blurring his vision as he scanned the battlefield. Explosions erupted around him, shaking the ground and deafening his ears. The Zitherans, a formidable alien race, had overwhelmed the human forces. Their sleek bioluminescent war machines darted across the wasteland, cutting down soldiers with surgical precision. Darius gritted his teeth, clutching his plasma rifle tightly despite the searing pain in his left arm. He knew he was alone now. His squad was either dead or too far away to help. Each step felt heavier than the last. The once hopeful cries of his comrades had faded into silence, replaced by the mechanical hum of Zitharan drones sweeping the area. Darius's legs buckled, and he fell to one knee, coughing up blood. He pressed his hand to his side, feeling the warmth of his own blood seeping through his armor. He wasn't going to make it. As his vision darkened, Darius thought of Earth, of the green fields and blue skies he had fought so hard to protect. He had promised his younger brother he would return, but now that promise felt like a cruel joke. He closed his eyes, preparing for the end. But then, something strange happened. Through the haze of smoke, a figure emerged. It wasn't human. The Zitharan prophetess stood tall and regal, her silver skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. Her violet eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity as she moved toward him, her flowing robes untouched by the chaos around her. Darius tensed, his fingers tightening around the trigger of his rifle. He didn't have the strength to fight, but he would die trying. The prophetess raised a hand, her voice cutting through the noise like a whisper carried on the wind. "Do not be afraid, human." Darius laughed bitterly, though it turned into a cough. "Afraid? Of course, I'm afraid. You're here to finish me off." She knelt beside him, her movements deliberate and graceful. Up close, Darius could see the intricate patterns etched into her skin, glowing faintly with each breath she took. "Your fate is not what you think," she said, her tone calm but urgent. "I have seen a vision, and you are at its center." Darius frowned, struggling to focus on her words. "A vision? What are you talking about?" The prophetess didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed her hand gently on his forehead. A strange warmth spread through his body, dulling the pain for a moment. Her eyes locked onto his, and he saw something that startled him. Fear. "I saw a future," she said quietly. "A future where your kind and mine stand united against a greater enemy. But that future cannot exist without you." Darius shook his head weakly, trying to pull away. "You're delusional. We've been killing each other for years. There's no unity, no future." "You don't have to believe me," she replied, her voice unwavering. "But the Vorax swarm is coming, and they will not discriminate between human or Zitharan. They will consume all." Darius's breathing grew ragged. He didn't know if it was the blood loss or the prophetess's strange words, but he felt the edges of his reality slipping away. The Vorax swarm. He had heard whispers of it in intercepted alien communications, but his superiors dismissed it as propaganda. Could it be real? "Why me?" he rasped. "Why not someone stronger? Someone who's not dying?" The prophetess tilted her head, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Because you are not dying. Not yet." She extended her hand, and Darius noticed an object in her palm. It was a small, glowing stone, pulsating like a heartbeat. The moment he looked at it, a wave of energy surged through him, making his mind spin with images he couldn't comprehend. Planets consumed by darkness, armies united under one banner, and his own face, leading the charge. Before he could process what he saw, the prophetess collapsed beside him. Her glow dimmed, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. "Take the stone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It will guide you." Darius stared at her, then at the stone. He didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about him anymore. With trembling fingers, he reached out and grasped the stone. It was warm, almost alive, and as soon as he touched it, he felt a surge of strength. His vision sharpened, and the pain in his body subsided slightly. But before he could say anything, a low hum filled the air. Zitharan drones were approaching, their lights piercing through the smoke. Darius looked down at the prophetess. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow. He didn't know why, but he couldn't leave her behind. Gritting his teeth, he hauled her over his shoulder, ignoring the fresh wave of pain that shot through his body. The stone in his hand pulsed again, and a faint voice echoed in his mind. "Run." And so he did, limping through the ruins with an alien prophetess on his back and an enemy force closing in behind him. Whatever fate awaited him, Darius knew one thing for certain. His fight wasn't over yet. The prophetess's vision. The sound of dripping water echoed in the dimly lit chamber. Darius Kane woke to a stabbing pain in his side and the unfamiliar sensation of warmth. For a moment, he thought he had died, but the sharp reality of his injuries quickly reminded him he was still very much alive. He tried to move but found himself strapped to a cold, metallic slab. The faint glow of alien glyphs danced across the curved walls around him. His instincts kicked in. He yanked against the restraints, but they didn't budge. "Where am I?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "You're safe, for now," came a soft, melodic voice. Darius turned his head sharply. The Zitharan prophetess, Nyara, stood at the edge of the room. Her violet eyes were dimmer than before, her once glowing skin now dull and pallid. She seemed drained, like someone who had given too much of herself. The sight of her only heightened his wariness. "You call this safe?" Darius snapped, jerking at his restraints again. "What did you do to me?" "I saved you," Nyara replied, her tone calm but tinged with exhaustion. "Had I left you on the battlefield, you'd be dead by now." "Maybe that would have been better," he muttered, his anger barely masking the confusion swirling inside him. "Why didn't you just finish me off like the rest of your kind?" Nyara approached slowly, her movements deliberate. "Because you are not like the rest of your kind, Captain Kane. You are important." Darius let out a hollow laugh. "Important? I'm just another soldier in a losing war. You've got the wrong guy." Nyara tilted her head, studying him with an unreadable expression. "Do you remember the stone?" At her words, a flash of memory surged through Darius's mind. The glowing artifact, the surge of energy, the overwhelming visions, it all came rushing back. He clenched his fists. "That thing. What did you do to me?" Nyara placed a hand over her chest, almost as if in reverence. "The Eclipser stone chose you. I did nothing but deliver it. You saw it, didn't you? The vision." Darius stared at her, his throat dry. "I don't know what I saw. Just chaos. Destruction. It didn't make any sense." "It will," she said softly, stepping closer. "The stone reveals fragments of the future, but only to those it deems worthy. You are the key to what comes next." Darius shook his head, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "What comes next? You're not making any sense." Nyara extended her hand, and suddenly the glyphs on the walls flared to life, projecting shimmering images into the air. Darius saw planets consumed by black tendrils, fleets of ships torn apart by swarms of monstrous creatures, and an unrelenting darkness spreading across the galaxy. "The Vorak swarm," Nyara said solemnly, her voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. "They are the end of all things. They devour worlds, leaving nothing behind. And they are coming." Darius's chest tightened. He had heard rumors, whispers and intercepted communications, but he had dismissed them as enemy propaganda. Now, staring at the horrific projections, he wasn't so sure. "Why should I believe any of this?" he said, his voice quieter now. "For all I know, This could be another one of your tricks. Nyara's eyes softened. I cannot make you believe, human. But the Vorak do not care about your skepticism. They will come, whether you are ready or not. Darius's mind raced. So why me? Why not someone else? Someone stronger, someone who actually has a chance. Nyara hesitated, as if grappling with something unspoken. Because the stone chose you, she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. And because I saw you in my vision. I saw you lead humans and Zitherans together against the Vorak. Without you, there is no hope. Darius laughed bitterly. Humans and Zitherans. Fighting together. We've been at war for years. There's no together. There's only death. Nyara stepped closer, her gaze piercing. War blinds you to what is possible. But I have seen the truth. You are the bridge between our species, Darius Kane. And if you do not rise to your destiny, the Vorak will consume us all. Darius's head swam with questions. He didn't trust her, but there was something in her voice, an urgency that made it hard to dismiss her entirely. Before he could respond, the ground trembled violently. The glyphs flickered, and a sharp alarm blared through the chamber. Nyara's expression darkened. They found us. Who? Darius demanded, his instincts flaring. Zitharan rebels, Nyara said, moving swiftly to release his restraints. Not all of my kind believe in peace. Many would rather see you dead than allow the possibility of an alliance. As soon as the restraints were undone, Darius sat up, wincing at the pain still coursing through his body. Great. So now I'm stuck between two enemies. Nyara handed him a small device. If you want to live, you'll have to trust me. Darius hesitated, staring at her outstretched hand. The alarms grew louder, and he could hear the hum of approaching ships. He cursed under his breath and snatched the device. This better not get me killed, he muttered. Nyara allowed herself a faint smile. If you die, there will be no one left to stop the Vorak. Darius followed her toward a hidden passage, his mind spinning. He didn't know if she was telling the truth, but one thing was clear. His fate had been ripped out of his control, and he was now part of something far bigger than himself. An uneasy alliance. The stench of burning metal and charred bodies hung heavy in the air as the stolen Zitharan ship sliced through the dark void of space. Darius Kane sat slumped against the cold wall of the ship's cargo bay, his plasma rifle balanced on his knees. His armor, patched hastily with alien tech, felt heavier than usual. Every muscle in his body ached, and his mind raced with doubts. Across from him, Nyara, the Zitharan prophetess, sat in meditative silence. Her glowing eyes were closed, and her silver skin shimmered faintly in the dim light of the cabin. The eerie hum of her presence had unsettled Darius ever since they'd escaped the rebel attack. He didn't trust her, not fully, but she was the only reason he was still breathing. You haven't said a word in hours, Darius muttered, his voice sharp. Makes me wonder what's going on in that alien head of yours. Nyara opened her eyes slowly, fixing him with a calm but piercing gaze. I am preparing for what comes next. Darius scoffed, leaning his head back against the wall. What comes next? I don't even know what next is. All I know is I'm running for my life, with someone who probably should have killed me the moment we met. Nyara's expression didn't falter. If I wanted you dead, Captain Kane, you would not be here. The fact that you are speaks to the gravity of what lies ahead. Darius rolled his eyes. More cryptic nonsense. You keep talking about this future, this alliance, but you haven't answered the one question I keep asking. Why me? Nyara stood, her movements deliberate and almost regal. She approached the viewport, staring into the infinite blackness of space. Because the Vorak swarm is already moving, Darius. They will not wait for you to accept your role. If you wish to survive, if we all wish to survive, you must become the leader I saw in my vision. Darius stood, his anger finally breaking through the exhaustion. And what if I don't want to be your hero? What if I'm just a soldier trying to make it to the next day? Nyara turned to face him, her voice soft but resolute. You don't have to want it. Destiny does not care about your desires, only your actions. Before Darius could respond, the ship's navigation console beeped sharply. A holographic map projected itself into the air, showing a cluster of human outposts. Darius stepped closer, his brows furrowing. That's Outpost Delta, he said, pointing at one of the glowing markers. We can regroup there. Nyara's face darkened. You believe your people will welcome me. They will see me as their enemy. Darius gritted his teeth. She wasn't wrong. The last time humanity had encountered Izithrin, it hadn't ended well. They'll listen to me, he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. They have to. Humans are driven by fear, Nyara replied, her tone neutral but cutting. Fear of the unknown. Fear of change. You must overcome that fear, or this alliance will fail before it begins. Darius turned away from her, gripping the edge of the console. He didn't have a choice, not really. The Vorak swarm wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, and it was coming. He didn't know if he could trust Nyara, but she was right about one thing. Humanity wouldn't survive on its own. The landing at Outpost Delta was anything but smooth. The moment the ship touched down, armed guards surrounded it, their rifles aimed squarely at the cockpit. Darius stepped out first, his hands raised in a show of surrender. Hold your fire, he barked. It's me, Captain Kane. One of the guards hesitated before lowering his weapon. Kane, we thought you were dead. Not yet, Darius muttered. He glanced back at the ship, where Nyara stood waiting in the shadows. But I've got someone you need to meet. The guards tensed as Nyara stepped into view. Her alien features and glowing presence immediately set them on edge. Rifles were raised again, and shouts of alarm echoed through the hangar. Stand down, Darius ordered, stepping between Nyara and the soldiers. She's not a threat. Not a threat. One of the guards spat. She's Zithrin. They've been slaughtering us for years. She saved my life. Darius shot back. And she's here to warn us about something far worse than the Zithrins. The tension in the room was palpable. Nyara stood silently, her expression unreadable as the humans argued over her presence. Darius could feel the weight of their hatred, the years of bloodshed that had made trust impossible. But he couldn't let this fall apart. Not now. Listen to me, he said, his voice rising above the chaos. You've all heard the whispers. The Vorak swarm is real, and it's coming for all of us, human and Zithrin alike. If we don't work together, there won't be a planet left to fight over. His words hung in the air, met with skeptical glances and murmurs of doubt. General Greaves, the grizzled leader of the outpost, stepped forward, his cold eyes narrowing at Darius. You expect us to believe this alien? Greaves growled. After everything they've done. I don't care what you believe, Darius snapped. What I care about is surviving. And if you'd rather let your pride get us all killed, then go ahead and shoot. But know this, the Vorak won't stop at Earth. They'll take everything. Greaves stared at Darius for a long moment before finally lowering his weapon. You've got guts, Kane. I'll give you that. He glanced at Nyara, his expression still hard. But if she steps out of line, it's on your head. Understood, Darius said, releasing a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. As the soldiers dispersed, Nyara stepped closer to him. You risked much to bring me here. Darius shrugged. You said it yourself. Destiny doesn't care what I want. Let's hope it knows what it's doing. But deep down, he wasn't sure if they'd made the right choice, or if they'd just set the stage for an even greater disaster. The human dilemma. The stereo lights of Outpost Delta's command center buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the grim faces of the officers gathered around the central hologram. Darius Kane stood at the edge of the room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Every fiber of his being told him this was a bad idea. Beside him, Nyara, the Zithrin prophetess, stood in composed silence, her glowing eyes taking in every hostile glance, and muttered word without reaction. General Greaves, a weathered veteran with scars etched deep into his face, leaned over the table, his voice low and steady. "Let me get this straight, Captain. You brought an alien into our outpost, a Zitharan, no less, because you think she has some vision about saving humanity." Darius met the general's gaze without flinching. "It's not just a vision, sir. It's a warning. The Vorak swarm is real. Nyara saved my life to deliver this message." Greaves let out a sharp laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You expect us to trust the word of the enemy? After everything they've done to us, I don't expect you to trust her," Darius shot back, his voice rising. "I expect you to trust me. You know me, sir. I wouldn't be standing here if I thought this was a trick." The room fell into tense silence. Officers exchanged wary glances, and the hologram in the center of the table flickered, displaying the fragmented remains of humanity's fleets scattered across the solar system. It was a stark reminder of how close they were to total annihilation. Finally, Greaves straightened, his sharp gaze settling on Nara. "Let's hear it, then. If this Vorak swarm is real, what proof do you have?" Nara stepped forward, her movements calm and deliberate. Her voice was soft, but carried an otherworldly resonance. "The Vorak are an ancient species, older than either of our civilizations. They do not conquer. They consume. Planets, ecosystems, life. Everything is devoured to fuel their endless swarm. Your people have heard whispers of them, but the truth is worse than anything you imagine." She raised her hand, and a projection sprang to life above her palm, a swirling mass of black tendrils that expanded rapidly, engulfing planets in its path. The officers recoiled at the sight, their skepticism giving way to unease. "I have seen this in my visions," Nara continued. "The Vorak are already moving toward this system. They will arrive in weeks, perhaps days. If we do not prepare, both humans and Zitharans will be wiped out." Greaves frowned, his skepticism battling with the fear creeping into his features. "Why would your people send you here? Why warn us?" "They did not send me," Nyara replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "Many Zitharans believe the Vorak are a myth, a story to frighten the young. But I know the truth. I acted alone because I believe your kind holds the key to our survival." Greaves snorted. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Nyara turned to Darius, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "Him." The room erupted into chaos. Officers shouted over one another, their disbelief echoing off the walls. Darius clenched his fists, his patience fraying with every passing second. Finally, he slammed his hand on the table, silencing the room. "Enough," he barked. "We don't have time for this. You've seen the reports. The Vorak aren't just rumors. If we don't start working together, we're all dead." Greaves held up a hand, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Working together. With them. Do you hear yourself, Kane? We've been fighting Zitharans for years. You think the fleet's going to get behind this? They won't have a choice," Darius said coldly. "Not when the Vorak start ripping through our colonies." The general leaned back, his expression hard. "Fine. Let's say, for argument's sake, that you're right. What do you propose we do?" Nyara answered before Darius could. "We must prepare both our species to fight together. But first, we must unlock the full power of the Eclipser Stone." Darius felt the weight of the room shift as all eyes turned to him. He pulled the small, glowing artifact from his belt and placed it on the table. The officers recoiled slightly, its pulsating light casting eerie shadows. "What is that?" Greaves asked, his voice low. "It's the key," Nyara said simply. "The Vorak fear it because it can destroy them, but it requires a bond between human and Zitharan to wield its full potential." Greaves stared at the stone, then at Darius. "And you're just going along with this? You're willing to gamble everything on the word of an alien?" Darius met his gaze, his jaw tight. "I've seen what the stone can do. I don't know if it'll work, but I know we don't have another option." The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Greaves sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Fine. We'll give you some time to prove this isn't a mistake. But if she so much as breathes wrong, she's dead. Understood?" "Understood," Darius said, though he felt a pit of unease forming in his stomach. As the officers dispersed, Naira turned to Darius. "They fear what they do not understand. You must show them there is another way." Darius exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "One problem at a time, Prophetess. Let's just survive the next few hours." But as he looked at the Eclipser stone, its glow reflecting in Naira's eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that their biggest challenges were still to come. Secrets of the Eclipser stone. The wind howled through the narrow canyon, carrying with it the scent of ancient dust and decay. Darius Kane adjusted the straps of his battered armor, his eyes scanning the jagged cliffs above for signs of movement. The barren landscape stretched endlessly around them, the only landmark a towering monolith in the distance, the Vault of Eternity. "That's it?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silence. "Doesn't look like much." "It is more than it seems," Naira replied, her tone calm but tinged with weariness. The Zitharan prophetess had been growing weaker with each passing hour. The glow of her silver skin was dimmer now, her movements slower, yet her resolve was unshaken. Darius shot her a sidelong glance. "You've been saying that about everything since this started. A little clarity wouldn't kill you." Naira smiled faintly, the expression almost human. "The vault is a place of secrets, Captain Kane. It was not built to impress the eye. It was built to protect what lies within." Darius grunted, his grip tightening on his rifle. The path ahead was treacherous, littered with jagged rocks and shifting sand. Every step felt like walking into the jaws of an ambush. He didn't trust the silence. It was too complete, too unnatural. "How far is it?" he asked, scanning the horizon again. "Close," Naira said, her gaze fixed on the monolith. "But the vault does not open easily. Its defenses are formidable." Darius stopped and turned to her, frustration flickering in his eyes. "Defenses? You didn't think to mention that before we got here." Naira met his glare with the same calm expression she always wore. "Would it have changed your decision to come?" He wanted to argue, but she had a point. With a resigned sigh, he gestured for her to keep moving. The two of them pressed on, the vault looming larger with every step. As they drew closer, Darius noticed intricate carvings etched into the surface of the monolith, symbols and patterns that seemed to shift when he looked at them too long. "What is this place, really?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "It is older than your species," Naira replied. "Older than mine. The vault was created by the ancients to hide the Eclipser stone from those who would misuse it. Few have entered and lived to tell the tale." Darius frowned, his hand instinctively brushing the stone strapped to his belt. "And you think I'll be the exception?" "I know you will," Naira said simply. Before he could respond, the ground beneath their feet rumbled. Darius raised his rifle, his eyes darting around for the source of the disturbance. The carvings on the monolith began to glow, casting an eerie blue light across the canyon. "Defenses, huh?" he muttered, backing up slightly. "What are we dealing with?" Naira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. The glowing symbols pulsed brighter, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. "The vault is alive," she said, her voice steady despite the tension crackling around them. "It will test us. Only those deemed worthy may enter." Darius cursed under his breath. "You really should have led with that." The ground shook again, and this time, massive stone constructs emerged from the canyon walls. They moved with a deliberate mechanical precision, their glowing eyes locked onto Darius and Naira. Each one was twice the size of a human, their limbs made of jagged stone and glowing veins of energy. "Of course," Darius muttered, raising his rifle. "Giant rock guardians. Why not?" They cannot be fought, Nara said, stepping beside him. Not in the way you are thinking. Then what do you suggest? He snapped, his finger hovering over the trigger. The vault must be convinced, she replied cryptically. It must see your worth. Before Darius could argue, one of the constructs raised its arm, and a pulse of energy shot toward him. He dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the blast. This doesn't feel like a negotiation, Nara. She stepped forward, placing herself between Darius and the advancing constructs. The glowing patterns on her skin flared to life, and she began to chant in a language Darius couldn't understand. The constructs paused, their movements slowing as if they were listening. The symbols on the monolith began to change, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The hum grew louder, resonating in Darius's chest. He clutched the eclipser stone tightly, its warmth growing more intense. Suddenly, the largest construct turned to face him directly. Its glowing eyes bore into him, and a voice echoed in his mind. Not words, but a deep, prodding presence that felt like it was peeling back the layers of his soul. Why do you seek the stone's power? Darius froze, unsure if he was imagining the voice or if the construct had truly spoken. To stop the Vorak, he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The presence pressed deeper. And what will you sacrifice to save them? Darius clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He thought of the countless battles he'd fought, the comrades he'd lost, the weight of survival that had driven him forward. Whatever it takes, he said finally. The constructs paused, their glowing eyes dimming slightly. The hum faded, and the monolith began to shift, revealing an opening in its base. Nara turned to Darius, a faint smile on her lips. You have passed, she said simply. Darius exhaled, lowering his rifle. That was a test. Nara nodded, the first of many. As they stepped into the vault's shadowy depths, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Whatever secrets the eclipser stone held, they were now closer to uncovering them. But at what cost? The final stand. The Vorak swarm arrived without warning. A tidal wave of darkness poured into the atmosphere of the barren world, where Darius Kane and his united forces had chosen to make their stand. The sky turned black as the alien monstrosities descended, their chittering screeches vibrating through the ground like a death knell. Darius stood at the forefront of the makeshift command line, his hands tightening around the glowing eclipser stone hanging from his chest. Its pulsating energy filled him with strength, but it came at a cost. His body burned as if it were being torn apart from the inside. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on, but that didn't matter now. The fate of two species depended on him. Behind him, the uneasy alliance of human and Zitharan warriors prepared for battle. The humans, clad in patched-together armor and wielding plasma rifles, stood shoulder to shoulder with the sleek, bioluminescent Zitharans. Their weapons hummed with alien energy, and their glowing eyes scanned the horizon with practiced precision. Captain Kane, General Greaves barked, his grizzled face etched with both doubt and resolve. The Vorak will overrun us within the hour unless we do something. Are you ready to use that damn stone? Darius turned to face the general, his jaw clenched. Ready or not, it's our only shot. But this isn't just about the stone. We hold the line together, or we die alone. Greaves nodded curtly, then moved to rally his troops. Darius felt Nara's presence before he saw her. The Zitharan prophetess stepped up beside him, her silver skin glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked weaker than ever, but her resolve was unshaken. The Vorak Queen is here, Nara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can feel her presence. She knows the stone is in your hands. Darius grimaced. Good. Let her come. I'll finish this myself if I have to. Nara reached out, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. The stone's power is not infinite, Darius. It will demand everything from you. Your strength, your will, your life. Are you ready for that? Darius met her gaze, his expression hard. I didn't come this far to back down now. Nyara nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. Then may fate favor you, Captain Kane. The Vorak swarm hit their defenses like a sledgehammer. The first wave of creatures was massive, their black, chitinous bodies glistening under the dim light. Rows of serrated limbs tore through the ground as they charged, their shrill cries piercing the air. Darius led the charge, the Eclipser stone glowing brighter with every step. Bolts of energy shot from his palm, slicing through the Vorak with devastating precision. He moved like a man possessed, his every strike fueled by the stone's unrelenting power. Behind him, human and Zitharan forces fought side by side. Plasma rifles and alien blades clashed against the Vorak's seemingly endless horde. Soldiers who had once called each other enemies now fought as brothers and sisters, their survival dependent on their unity. But it wasn't enough. For every Vorak they killed, two more seemed to take its place. The swarm was endless, an unrelenting tide of death that threatened to consume them all. Fall back, Graves shouted, his voice hoarse. Regroup at the secondary line. Darius ignored the order, his focus locked on the dark shape looming in the distance. The Vorak queen had arrived. She was massive, her grotesque form towering over the battlefield. Her many eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, and her voice slithered into Darius's mind like a poison. You are a fool, human. The stone will not save you. It will destroy you. Darius stumbled, clutching his head as the queen's voice grew louder. The stone's power flared within him, pushing back against the mental assault. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to stand. Nyara, he shouted, his voice strained. The queen, she's trying to break me. Nyara appeared at his side, her glowing hands reaching out to steady him. Focus, Darius. The stone is yours to command. She cannot take it from you. Drawing on every ounce of his willpower, Darius raised the stone high. Its light intensified, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The Vorak hesitated, their movements faltering under the stone's power. The queen let out a deafening roar, her massive form lurching forward. Darius knew this was the moment. If he didn't act now, they were all dead. He turned to Nyara, his voice quiet but resolute. Get the troops out of here. Nyara's eyes widened. What are you? There's no time to argue. He barked. This ends here. Nyara hesitated, then nodded. May your sacrifice not be in vain. As she retreated, Darius faced the queen alone. The stone burned brighter than ever, its energy coursing through him like wildfire. The queen's voice echoed in his mind once more, but this time, he pushed back. This is for everyone you've taken, he growled. For every world you've destroyed. With a roar of defiance, Darius unleashed the stone's full power. A beam of blinding light erupted from his hands, engulfing the queen in its fury. The Vorak screamed, their hive mind collapsing as their queen was obliterated. But the stone demanded its price. Darius felt his body breaking, his vision darkening as the energy consumed him. He fell to his knees, a faint smile on his lips as the Vorak fell silent. The battle was over. The swarm was defeated, but Darius Kane's final act had saved them all. A new dawn. The battlefield was silent, a graveyard of shattered bodies and smoldering wreckage. The Vorak swarm, once an unstoppable tide of destruction, was gone. Its hive mind severed, its queen obliterated. Yet victory came with a heavy cost. In the center of the devastation, where the ground was scorched black by the Eclipser stone's unleashed power, Darius Kane lay motionless. His armor was cracked and charred, his body still radiating faint traces of the stone's energy. Around him, human and Zitharan soldiers gathered, their weapons lowered, their faces etched with disbelief. Nyara knelt beside him, her silver skin dim and her once bright eyes filled with sorrow. She placed a trembling hand on his chest. His heartbeat was faint but steady, a fragile thread of life holding on against impossible odds. You gave everything, she whispered, her voice breaking. You carried the weight of two worlds. General Greaves stepped forward, his grizzled face unreadable as he stared down at the man he had once doubted. Is he? Nyara shook her head. He lives, but the stone has taken its toll. He may never wake. Greaves exhaled heavily, running a hand over his face. Damn fool. He did it, though. He saved us. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon of the barren world, the survivors began their grim work. Bodies were carried away, wounded tended to, and ships repaired. For the first time in years, humans and Zitherans worked side by side, not as enemies, but as allies bound by shared sacrifice. Nyara stood at the edge of the battlefield, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She could feel the ripple of the Eclipser stone's power fading, its purpose fulfilled. Yet something lingered, a faint whisper in the back of her mind. Prophetess, a voice called behind her. She turned to see a young Zitharan soldier, his expression uncertain. What happens now? She glanced back at Darius's still form, then at the mingling groups of humans and Zitherans. Now we begin again, she said. The Vorak are defeated, but the wounds between our species run deep. Trust will not come easily, but it must come. The soldier nodded solemnly and returned to his duties. Nyara looked down at her trembling hands. She had seen the future in fragments, but this was a path uncharted. The Eclipser stone had chosen Darius for a reason, but its purpose wasn't just to destroy the Vorak. It was to light a path forward. Days turned into weeks. The survivors established a fragile coalition, pooling resources and technology to rebuild. The alliance was uneasy, with old wounds flaring up in heated debates and tense standoffs. Yet the shared memory of Darius Kane, his sacrifice, his courage, acted as a unifying force. In a quiet medbay on the outskirts of the outpost, Darius lay in a coma. Machines hummed softly around him, monitoring his fragile condition. Nyara visited daily, sitting silently at his bedside. She spoke to him sometimes, recounting the progress of the coalition, the hurdles they faced, and the glimmers of hope that emerged. You were right, she said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. They can change. We can change. But we need you to wake up. They need you. The room fell silent again, save for the steady beeping of the monitors. Nyara closed her eyes, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had given everything to bring him here. And now, she could only wait. One night, as the outpost lay shrouded in darkness, the Eclipser stone pulsed faintly. Its light, thought extinguished, flickered to life, casting an ethereal glow across the room. Nyara's eyes snapped open as she felt the shift, a presence she hadn't sensed since the battle. Darius, she whispered, leaning closer. His fingers twitched. Slowly, his eyes fluttered open, their usual sharpness dulled by exhaustion. He blinked, his gaze unfocused until it settled on her. Nyara, he rasped, his voice barely audible. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. You're awake. Darius struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his body. Did we? You did, she said, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. The Vorak are gone. Humanity and Zitherans are rebuilding together. You gave them a chance. He leaned back, his expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. And the stone? It is quiet now, Nyara replied, glancing at the faintly glowing artifact. Its purpose has been fulfilled, but its legacy lives on. Darius nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the ceiling. So, what now? Nyara's smile widened, a hint of mischief breaking through her usual calm. Now, Captain Kane, we teach two species how to live as one. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Darius allowed himself a small, weary smile. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he believed it was worth fighting for. And as the Eclipser stone's light faded into the night, a new dawn began to rise, not just for Darius, but for all of them.